Welcome to Tough Conversations with David Wood, where play meets depth. We help teams and high-performing leaders like you to master your tough conversations so you succeed in your career and in your life. When we avoid tough conversations, we stay small. Teams stay disengaged, conflicted, and ultimately end up quitting. When we lean in and master our tough conversations, they become the defining moments that literally shape our careers, our relationships, and our lives. So let's dive in and master your next tough conversation so you can be the leader that you would follow. Let's play. I feel a little teary hearing that. I feel so seen and received. You got to the core of it.
2019 was like the edgiest year of my life. I felt like I was riding an edge the entire year. Like, there were men in there who've been in and out of prison for 15, 20 years. And they said to us, we've done everything in and out of the system, therapy, everything, and there's nothing like this. I got my marching orders that day from those men.
A big thank you to NKWP for this wonderful review on iTunes. Tough conversations can be scary, and we tend to avoid them at all costs. This podcast is great for anyone who's looking to grow in their life and relationships. And here's another review I really like by JetSet7777. Nobody likes having tough conversations. They're easy to procrastinate and yet almost always yield positive results. This is a guide for how to overcome your fear and tips for how to have effective, tough conversations. I highly recommend. Thank you guys. I appreciate reviews. And if you like this episode, there'll be a link at the end where you can review, and I may read your review out on a future episode. And now, on with the show. Welcome everybody to this exciting episode of the Tough Conversations with David Wood podcast. I'm here with somebody that I'm excited to introduce you to. This is Laurie Lazar. Firstly, welcome to the show, Laurie.
Thank you, David. I'm happy to be here.
The reason, what we're going to talk about, I wanted to, before I read a quick bio of Laurie, we've been doing some really cool stuff in the prison system. And this show is all about tough conversations. It's all about speaking your truth. It's all about daring. And Laurie, you model that really well for me, truth and daring.
Thank you.
So I want to get into how you've actually enrolled the Department of Corrections in your vision, because there are a lot of listeners, I believe, who want to enroll people in their vision, and they want to speak their truth, and they want to be daring, and they want to create something that's bigger than them, which you've done. So that's what this is about. And I wanted you on the show too, because I have a potentially awkward or tough conversation that I'd like to have with you. And rather than us having it offline and then talking about how it went, I thought, why don't we pull back the curtain and show people our technology that we've been using with inmates, and so they can actually see a real life request, like, are you open to it? And then if you're a yes, and that's totally up to you, if you're a yes, we'll do it on the show so that people can really feel it in their bones, what's possible.
Great.
Laurie Lazar holds a BS in business, computer information systems, and she has a master's in education, which I didn't know, with an emphasis in curriculum development. Laurie spent 20 years providing high-level corporate recruiting, but check out what she does now. Now she brings authentic relating skills into the Colorado prison system and helps inmates transform their lives, both when they're in prison and when they get out of prison, so that they can hold down a job and relate to their family who might be upset with them. And but I won't steal too much of your thunder. Laurie, is there anything else that you'd want people to know about your background or who you are before we dive into some of the amazing work you're doing?
Well, the only thing I would add to that is that I've really, my whole life, been interested in psychospiritual development, and I've done a lot of study in that realm. And I've always believed that relationships are the most important thing that's going on here. And that was always in the background until recently, until this work. And now that feels like it's in the forefront of my life.
Thank you. Maybe you could let people know how we know each other.
Yeah. So David, you started coming into the prisons and leading with us. And so we've done it now, I think 3 or 4 times together inside the prisons. And then you also came with me to present to the wardens at their first warden meeting of 2020.
Yeah.
And we just did that a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So listeners, I've been, a friend of mine told me that he was busy one day because he had to go and teach authentic relating to prison inmates. I'm like, how do I, can you hook me up with that? It sounds like, that's something I'm really interested in. I'd like to give back and like that. And then, so you and I talked and you said, come on along and assist. And then bit by bit, I started taking on a bigger role. And yeah, we've done 4 prisons. We've done staff from 20 prisons, the pre-release staff.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we went and did, you got us in a room with 15 wardens, which I think is incredible. Like, so for anyone building a business, you tend to climb the ladder. And like, even in the podcast industry with me doing interviews, you climb the ladder and get to bigger and bigger podcasts. And then as you sell your services, you get to bigger and bigger decision makers. Well, you, Laurie, you started working with pre-release staff, and then they would be enrolled, and then they had to go and enroll the warden. But I said to you, as we drove away from the meeting with the wardens, before today, how many wardens have you sat down with?
Yeah, 0.
You said 0, and you went
0.
from 0 to 15 in the space of like a minute.
Yeah.
So we've had a good time going away and going into prisons and like really intense experiences. And I wanted people to hear of some of your experiences. What is it that inmates get out of the work you do? When you go in, you do a 2-day training, what do they leave with? Unfortunately, they don't leave. They stay there in the prison. But what do they have at the end of that training?
I mean, David, I would say they stay there then, but over 90% of them will be getting out. And sometimes some of them are getting out the very next week after we're there. And one thing I've heard inmates say, people that are literally, a guy that was getting out the next day said, you guys coming in here, I just had eye contact with a woman. And I realized I haven't had eye contact with a woman in the 6 years I've been in prison, except for my wife when she's come to see me. And now I feel like when I get out there, just having this experience here, I didn't even realize that I hadn't looked in the eyes of a woman until now. So
Right.
Just the connection, and we do work with eye contact in there, and it's so powerful to bring people, out of themselves and actually look into the eyes of another human being without threat, without imminent threat.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking that sounds like something unique to inmates, that they wouldn't have had eye contact with a woman. But I've also seen that a lot of the things that we do in the prisons are identical almost to how we train someone on the outside, mm-hmm. and what other people use. So you just mentioned something that I think a lot of listeners could relate to, which is about how little eye contact we make as humans. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's powerful for people when we do the course on the inside, or when we're doing the course for the outside, to really just sit and look at another human being in the eye for, a span of 20 seconds or maybe 30, and just be with what's here right now. And, not be like just talking about the future, or what I did last week, or, what I'm making for dinner. It's actually being right here, right now. And the depth that can be reached between humans in just a matter of moments is pretty profound. And, in today's world, I think people are really craving a deeper experience, a deeper human experience. And so what we say is we're rehumanizing the world one human at a time. And literally the prison I was just in last week, one of the men at the very end, he's a guy that's been in for over 30 years. And he's a leader of the 7 Habits program, Stephen Covey's work. They do a lot of that work in the prison system. And he's a teacher of that, and he's very involved in there as a mentor. And he looked at me and said, this is the first time I felt human, I think, in my lifetime.
Wow. Eye contact seems to be one of those real intimate moments, vulnerable moments, where someone can see into you and you see into somebody else.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I hear inmates share that, like the eyes are the windows to the soul. And, it's really uncomfortable at first. They're like, oh my God, I can't
Yeah.
believe you're making me do this. And we hear that on the outside too, and just with a little bit of practice, we say it's all a practice. Everything we're teaching in there it needs to be practiced.
Yeah.
But just with a little bit of practice, just within an hour, how much more comfortable we can get, being with each other and looking into each other's eyes.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that eye contact, when you're having tough conversations can really make all the difference. If you can, if there's a way to express your compassion or your curiosity through your eyes.
Right. What comes up for me is it's like you're staying with the person. I'm here. I'm
Mm-hmm.
with you. I'm not going anywhere, which is a
Right.
very unusual experience to have because most people are kind of flitting around the mind. They're up in the head thinking about different things. And if someone is looking at me, then it's unusual. It's like, oh, you're here. What you're saying might be a little scary, but you're here with me. We're working it out together.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how you've ridden your edge as you've built this and gone into prisons. Could you tell us about like how you got your initial gigs with
Yeah.
the prison system for anyone who's ever got to sell themselves or sell their product? And was that edgy for you? Like, where did you have to
Oh my
ride
gosh.
your edge?
Yeah, this entire 2019 was like the edgiest year of my life. I felt like I
Wow.
was riding an edge the entire year, like right at the edge of my growth edge in so many areas, because I was not only like leading a new organization as an executive director, but I was also training myself to be a course leader and to lead this 2-day course, which is very intensive.
All right.
Yeah. So in both of those areas, I was simultaneously on my edge the entire year. Felt like my whole life, I sort of got this entrepreneurial spirit and what do I want to start? And I've had lots of ideas and lots of like, oh, maybe I should do this or that. And I was actually getting to a point where I felt like almost like just giving up, like a sense of like, oh, I'm later in life than I thought I would be, starting something new, and I haven't found it yet, and maybe I'm just gonna float along my whole life. And what I would say to anyone that's feeling that way, that's just like, oh yeah, is just keep being in the world and keep walking towards the things that you are passionate about, that light you up, until something sparks. And for me, in the back of my mind, I had my whole life this idea of like, oh, I should volunteer in jails and prisons. And then I happened to see this movie about this prison program in Texas. And the next day I got online and I saw that there was a co-facilitation course at the Boulder County Jail. And I do have a master's in education. I've done a little bit of teaching, and I thought, why not? And I went and interviewed for it. And I started co-facilitating a class at the Boulder County Jail. And immediately I felt like, I feel at home here in jail. One of the inmates told me, he's like, you seem like you're at home here. But that course wasn't quite right for me. And then when I found out they were going to be bringing this 2-day authentic relating course into the Boulder County Jail, I was like, oh yeah, I love authentic relating. It's made the most difference for my relationship with my husband and other relationships in my life. And I definitely felt like I was at my edge in that course. I felt my heart pounding out of my head, my chest, like, what are they going to think of this work?
Right. I think I did imagine them as like arms folded, not interested in this. This is a bunch of hippie woo-woo crap.
Yeah, like, what is this thing you're trying to kind of, and I knew that it invokes vulnerability in people. And I didn't actually know how safe that would be to teach a bunch of inmates how to be vulnerable and then say, see you later.
Right.
Are they safe in there if they're going to be vulnerable?
Right. Yeah,
So
they could be beaten up if they say the wrong thing or something goes the wrong way.
yeah. And so we were, as a team, leading it, we were a little bit like, are we doing the right thing? And so I can speak to that, or I can keep speaking on the growth edge as far as
Let's jump to the cold calling. Was that
okay.
like, I think that's an
Yeah.
amazing story. You just calling up people you don't know, calling
Yeah.
up a prison general information number and leaving a voicemail for people. We've got this amazing program. It's going to transform. Like, was that scary for you, or was that easy for you?
Well, David, it's interesting because that day at the Boulder County Jail, when we were done on the second day, there were men in there who've been in and out of prison for 15, 20 years. And they said to us, we've done everything in and out of the system, therapy, everything. And there's nothing like this. This is what we need. And we need this throughout the system. So to me, David, I got my marching orders that day from those men. And I went out and I made this whole spreadsheet and I started calling all these prisons, just like you said. I did a bunch of homework before I made a call, just so I could be prepared about talking about, criminogenic factors and how pro-social skills are at the top of the list for why people recidivate, is they don't have the pro-social skills. They might get a job, they might have support in their community, but they actually don't know how to have a relationship and communicate on the job site or with their partners, and they run into trouble.
So you were worried that they were going to ask you questions you couldn't answer, and
Yes.
How do I justify this? They're going to grill me.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm seeing now the two edges, and I didn't realize that. It didn't hit me before, but you got one edge. How do I sell this program? Even though you weren't charging at the time, how do I sell this free program out of all the people who are competing to try and do volunteer work? How do I get in? And then your other edge, as you said, was leading a program that you weren't comfortable leading yet. And I love your story. I've heard this about how one day, I think maybe it was your second course or third course, that the leader said to you, sent you a text saying, oh, by the way, I'm sick today, you're leading.
Yes.
And you and Jennifer had to just take the whole thing and run with it. So you've got an edge of how do I sell it, but then an edge of how do I deliver it? Because this isn't really my thing yet. And I really want to acknowledge you for both how I've seen you grow as a leader. I've seen you go from really second guessing yourself to just sharing your passion. And I've watched the inmates' faces as your face lights up and you're just in your dignity. So I acknowledge you for that. That's been really wonderful to see. And then the other thing is, I think it's an amazing success story, your progression of selling this, that you went from cold calling prisons to getting someone to say yes, to then getting another pre-release specialist to come and join and be enrolled. Oh, wow, I want this for my prison. And then you parlayed that into a training for 20 staff from 20 prisons to show them really what this work can do, and then got yourself into a room with 15 wardens. And you've spoken to the head of the Department of Corrections across the whole of Colorado and pitched him. I don't see any limits to your daring, and I really acknowledge the amazing work you've done.
Well, I really appreciate that reflection, David. It's the impact that the inmates are expressing that they're getting, and them saying, oh yeah, I reconnected with my parents who I haven't spoken to in 15 years. A man in the program said, Jackie, I want you to know, I was planning on killing myself. I was selling everything. I'd been selling everything, and I was gathering all these pills. And last night after the program ended, I went and flushed those pills down the toilet.
Wow.
So it's just those kind of results that keep me going.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely powerful technology. And let's demo a little for people so they can see the kind of things that we're teaching, you're teaching in prisons. I think what I want to do is let our listeners know the 4 steps to having a tough conversation. And you don't have to be a yes. I want you to model just being you. Okay. And I'm going to ask you if you're open to having the tough conversation here on the air, and you can say yes or no, as anybody can.
Yeah.
So the 4 steps that I'm going to model: 1, ask permission to have the conversation, and then if we do go further, if Laurie's a yes, step 2 is to share 1 hope and 1 fear. And I often blend step 2 with step 1. You'll see that. Step 3, share the issue. And if you have a request, this is a good place to make the request. We don't want to just complain or just share our experience, but what's something the other person could do that would move things forward? And then step 4 might be the most important step of all. Get curious and listen. What's it like for Laurie to have me bring this issue to her? What are her ideas? Maybe she's got something better than I thought of. So this is where we get collaborative and we work it out together, which makes it less scary. Laurie, I want to talk about something that I've had some charge on. It's a little edgy for me to bring it up, but I want to talk about it because I think it would have me feel closer to you, and it would increase my trust in you, which would mean I'd be more likely to be a yes to us working together in the future. And I wonder, it'd probably take us about maybe 10 minutes, and I wonder if you're open to that.
Sure. Yes, I'm enrolled in that.
Okay, thank you. And for listeners, note I slipped the hope into that first step because I want to enroll Laurie. So when I don't just ask, can we have a potentially awkward conversation, but this is why. Here's my hope. So my hesitation, like I had to look like, why is this a tough conversation for me? And Laurie, I think the reason it's tough is because it involves my real feelings. I'm like, I feel vulnerable when I'm sharing with someone my charge, and it's like, what if you judge me, or what if you don't receive it or listen to me or something like that? I was hesitant because, maybe you'll feel defensive as well, and that doesn't sound fun to me, or you probably. So that was my hesitation in bringing it up. But again, I think it's worth it because I think I want to feel your care as a friend. Can I tell you what the issue is?
Yes.
All right, thanks. So it's about when I said you could host an event at my house. When we got to 4:00, which was the time that we said that it would end, you said to people, hey, is everyone okay if we go 5 minutes longer? And I was lying down because I was ill. I was lying down behind the chair, and I didn't say anything. It felt awkward to me to speak up and just stop the whole thing and say, wait a minute, I'm not okay with that. And what I would have preferred greatly is that you ask me specifically, David, I want to go past the time container. Is that okay? I know you're not feeling well. I'm happy to wrap it up here, and not put me in the position of having to speak up and stop the whole show, which I have agency. I thought about it at the time and I was like, I could do that. And I decided not to, but I think I felt, what's the word? Like I wasn't being honored or respected. And the time container was just not honored in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little more, but I want to stop and check in. How are you doing? And is there anything you want to say, any response you want to make to that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, David, I really appreciate you sharing that. I had no idea that impacted you. And hearing you say that, when I reflect back to that moment, it totally didn't even occur to me to ask you. And now I can see that. I mean, that would have been the right thing to do. You were hosting the event. It was supposed to end at 4:00. Like in the moment, I was totally taken in, like, oh my gosh, we didn't get everything done we wanted to. And we originally thought we were going to be 5 hours and we only did 4. And so I was just thinking of all these other things, and I wasn't thinking about you. And I can see that had an impact on you. And I can see that wouldn't have felt, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't have felt respected by that. I wouldn't have felt honored by that. And I totally missed it. And I completely just assumed that it was okay. And I now reflecting on that, I feel like that was really disrespectful. And I apologize. I'm really sorry.
I feel a little teary hearing that. I feel so seen and received. You got to the core of it when you said, I wasn't thinking about you. Yeah, I wanted you to be thinking of me. Like, oh, David, you're not feeling well. Let's get out of the house, everybody. Let's all work. I want you guys on this. Let's get David his house back. Let's be out in 15 minutes. Like something like that would have felt really good. And now I'm seeing your world more. And I saw a little bit of it when I did some work, because initially when I'm triggered, I'm not seeing anybody else's world, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now I can get, you're excited, you've got this thing, you're working this thing, and we talked about when it would end, 4 o'clock, but we didn't mock up time for breakdown, and
Right.
time for debrief, and time for people to chat. And we didn't say, all right, it'll be done by 4 and we'll be out by 4:20. I didn't think of that. And so next time, that's what I could have done differently.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I feel much closer to you. And I didn't expect that you'd be so warm and take on so much responsibility. I was open to that not happening, but I feel really good about that. And I now feel open. If you did ask me again for it to be in the house, I feel like I might be a yes, whereas before I was feeling a no. So thank you.
Wow. Well, I
And
really appreciate you sharing that, David. And I have to say, like when we were starting this process, I was like, oh gosh, and you're like, and one of your fears that you shared was like that I might get defensive. And I know I'm a pretty defensive person naturally. And that's part of why I love this work so much, because you teach what you need to learn, right? And I'm learning more and more how to not be so defensive and how to be more open to tough conversations. And I still felt my guard go up when we were starting the conversation.
yeah.
And I was working with that, and I just right now I feel just so grateful that you brought this, because this is one of those things that you could have just let it slide and not mentioned it, and it could have just been in the background between us and
impacting how I relate
yeah.
with you. Yeah, it would have for
Yeah.
sure. And as we wrap this up, is there anything else you want people to know about the amazing work that you're doing for our incarcerated population?
Yeah, well, what I want people to know is this really is making an impact, and people, inside are affecting their families and future generations that could end up in prison or committing crimes. And giving the people on the inside these tools not only has them affect people on the outside in that way, but also has the system be less violent inside, makes it safer for all the staff that are working there and for their families. And so that's what we're up to. And we're really up to creating a model in Colorado that can be used then throughout the country. And we're just getting this going. We're doing this like on a shoestring. We really appreciate any support.
Right. You go by
offer.
funding, right? Private funding is what
Yes,
keeps
private
the lights
funding.
running.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, any donations that people might want to give would be so appreciated and really, really needed. And we're having now that we did the warden meeting, now we're having more prisons reach out and say that they want us in more. So we're needing to train people faster. So there's a lot going on.
There's
and
demand.
Yeah.
And people can subscribe, right? You can go and make a recurring donation. So like even $5 is a latte a month. You can donate basically a latte a month. And I wanted to make the point, I think you might have said it before, but these people are going to get out. Like a huge percentage of them will be our neighbors.
Yes.
So this is not only just a feel-good thing, that it does something for a population that really can use some help, because all their rights are stripped of them, and they're facing a hugely uphill battle when they get out of prison. Hugely uphill. Laurie and I we've done that. We've gone and played a mock game, a parole game. I failed. I was sent back to prison. It was so hard, everything that I was expected to do.
Yeah.
And
so it was a mock of people getting out of prison. We were each given a profile, and this is who you are and all the things you have to do immediately when you get out of prison. Get your license and the bus passes and report in, all of these things that you have to do. And it's a lot.
It was a lot for us. And imagine if we'd been incarcerated for 20 years and now we've got to just have those skills magically. So it's not just a feel-good thing for people who could really use it, but they will be out and they will be part of our society. And it's good for all of us to have them reintegrated, to have our brothers and sisters.
As feeling like human beings, feeling some dignity as they enter society, which is not easy.
That's what you're giving. You're giving dignity. You're giving the gift of dignity. So where can they do that?
AuthenticRelating.org. authenticrelating.org is the website. And really, we appreciate any donations whatsoever. Like you said, David, a latte a month would be so appreciated.
Yeah. All right. Laurie Lazar, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, David.
You've been listening to Tough Conversations with David Wood. Now it's action time. Mastering your tough conversations will have a major impact on your team, your company, and you as a high-performing executive or entrepreneur. If you're ready, request a discovery session with me at playforreal.life so we can transform your team, your company, and you. And if you've enjoyed this episode, I would love you to help me spread this message of tough conversations in a very simple way. Just leave a public review at playforreal.life/podcast. And you may hear me read it out loud and thank you live on a future podcast. Now, let's play.